Welcome to another episode of Bringing Down the Grindhouse, a podcast where we discuss horror in media. But today we've got something a little bit different. We're going to do one of our special non-horror episodes where we're going to discuss The Animatrix and
The Fifth Element. Yep.
How's it going, John?
I'm doing well. I feel like these two got really into like heavier topics because it's science fiction, and so they always explore these really heavy topics. But The Fifth Element is kind of unique because it does include a lot of comedy while you're watching it. But I've seen both of them a bunch of different times.
Too many times.
I've seen them like over a dozen times each, I think. So,
that's fair.
Super familiar with both of them. The Fifth Element I watched when I was a kid. It was like one of the ones my mom showed me.
Mm-hmm.
And it had like younger Bruce Willis where he actually has hair.
Yeah, right? I actually remember specifically being over at my I will always remember like my nice little Indian family that lived next door. I was really good friends with their son and hung out with them all the time. But I remember they were watching Fifth Element, and I remember specifically coming into the movie with the stones being pulled out of that lady.
Yeah, he's like pulling them out of her stomach.
Yeah, exactly. But we'll get to that in a little bit. But that's from what I remember from the movie, and then I have rewatched it multiple times because it's great. It's so good.
So to start, we're gonna go with The Fifth Element first. So The Fifth Element came out in 1997. So it's a little bit older now, definitely like a late 90s movie. Mm-hmm. You watch it now, and the special effects kind of hold up. They're doing pretty good because they had people just in suits for like most of the aliens. The only parts that are like really digital is some of the space stuff. But
and some of like the head change, like the CGI on like the head, like when the
that still looks pretty good.
Yeah, it still looks good for what it is, but it's still CGI. You can still tell.
It was directed by Luc Besson. This is the guy who did Lucy, the one with Scarlett Johansson, and then the other one called Valerian in the City of like 1,000 Planets. Basically, it was like another sci-fi story that he adapted into a script and brought it out. So he's definitely been in the sci-fi genre.
One of the cool things about The Fifth Element is that he wrote it in high school. He was like 16 years old when he wrote the script for it. And so it's interesting to me that like years later he like ends up getting it like finally put up and got it going and got a green light for it.
It really is like its own unique story. Like it stands on its own, and it didn't need too much filled in for you to be able to enjoy the story. And I think he did that really well with the script writing, where they had a lot of context clues just from what they were telling you and the areas that they were living in, but nothing else was really super important besides that. You just knew that he was like in New York. And technically, I guess, like, what would be Brooklyn? He was, like, in a certain part of Brooklyn.
I mean, and Bruce Willis has that, like, accent kind of, too. So he's, like, very definitely, like, you're like, oh, yeah, he's in, like, Brooklyn, but, like, year 3000 Brooklyn.
So I thought this film was interesting because after watching it after so many years and then analyzing it again with all of, like, the tools I got from school, it was interesting for the time period that it came out in. For being in like the 90s, they were really dealing with like kind of larger ideas for the film itself for sci-fi, but most sci-fi does that anyway. What I liked was introducing this character as he was pretty much like kind of just down on his luck. He was forcefully like retiring himself. He didn't want to be like part of the military unit that he was part of before. And like they don't really explore too much of that, but it seems like he's kind of just over it and wants to drive a cab instead.
Like he's kind of like he's in hiding almost.
Yeah. And he keeps getting calls from his like previous, I'm guessing it's like one of his older unit mates or someone he knows well. That or the person who owns the cab company. Yeah. He calls him Finger. He like calls him on the phone and like constantly is like, "What are you doing? Where are you like? Or, like, how's the cab? Like, is it okay?"
Yeah.
And so he keeps calling him for that. But the story basically starts with him trying to just go about his regular day.
I love all of the little subtle hints in his apartment and stuff that really represent the society that he's in. Like the two circles that are on the wall that say "keep clear."
Yep.
Like is definitely representative of like almost like a dystopian sort of setting in a way where your living space has to be able to comply with authority.
Oh yeah, every bit of their story is that way. So they live in this like policed state where the police can go anywhere at any time, and they constantly search. So they needed to put in measures that made it easier for them. So like they can see through your front door. If you like put your hands there, they want you to stand there and like be non-threatening. Even his cab has like a hook where the police car can hook onto it if they're trying to like arrest someone, which they use later when they're trying to arrest Lilu. But all of it, what was hilarious is that it's essentially like the extreme form of capitalism that was happening.
Yeah.
Because they even had product placement with McDonald's.
Yep. They did.
Which I'm sure they paid for, and like they got in there. I thought it was a great joke.
Yeah, exactly. But it's still like it suits the setting.
Right.
Another thing in his apartment that I love, which is just it's a really small thing. It doesn't matter, but I love that he has his you only get 4 a day, or it's time to quit, like his cigarettes, and they're all backwards.
Yes.
He lights from the filter end.
I noticed that too. I wonder if they did that so they wouldn't get in trouble with like tobacco companies.
I know that's pretty funny, actually.
I feel like a tobacco company would sue them if they tried to say like tobacco is bad for you.
Yeah, if they tried to have that in the movie.
They got the lobbying money to be like, fuck you and your movie.
Yeah.
We're not going to have you saying tobacco is bad. So they must have flipped it so that it just looks like they can't tell what it is. But yeah, at first, when I first watched it, I thought he was lighting it backwards.
Yeah, he definitely is. But it's not like, I think the cigarettes are just made that way.
Yeah, they just made that way.
Like
super weird.
The tobacco company wanted to be relevant, so they're like, we'll just flip it.
Well, what I liked too was that in the tiny apartment, it was used like the space was used really well. So like his bed kind of folds into like a drawer. His fridge goes down and becomes his shower. And so like, and then they all get like washed and like cleaned over again. And then but like it goes in as soon as he stands up. And then he has like more space to walk around in there. But he's also got his cat, which is kind of funny. And the cat seems to like really like to watch television. And so this is how they introduce the contest that he wins later. Is already being advertised on the TV. Like, hey, go and like apply and see if you can win this. And it also features Ruby Rod, who ends up being a character later. You can hear his voice all through there. And so he doesn't really know what's going to happen.
Oh, Chris Tucker's so great in this movie.
Yeah. But it's like, but I think even before that, they have the scene with the archeologist in the 50s.
Yeah, it's in the very beginning of the movie. Yeah, and it's
40s or 50s.
It's like hundreds of years. It's like 100 years in the past and whatnot, man.
Yeah, because they move forward 300 years.
Yeah, there we go, 300 years.
They move forward 300 years from that point. But before they do that, they establish that the stones that are going to be used later in the movie have been kept safe on Earth by like a priest and his his
alien
group.
buddies.
Yeah. Well, it's like they basically entrusted him and anyone else to save the stones there and then to like pass their knowledge on to anyone else that they teach. And so they're like, the stones aren't safe here anymore, so we're going to take them. And so they show up and take the stones from the planet, but they also leave a little key behind so that they can like show it's like out of the robot's finger basically when he gets for some reason he gets crushed in the wall, which is really weird. He
gets shot. And it slows him down because the younger kid freaks out that there's aliens here because none of them know that they're coming. And then the priest is going to investigate the temple that's archaeologists are exploring.
Right.
And then the aliens show up. They're just like, who the fuck are you? Weird. Right. And then but yeah, he's like walking out and the kid freaks out and shoots at the alien guy. And then he can't get out before the doors close. So he gives them the key and then dies.
I think the only part I didn't understand was why did the wall start closing anyway?
Probably something that's like timed to keep it secret or something
is
along
it like
those lines.
I guess it could be like a booby.
It maybe only opens when they're there.
It's like a booby trap, I guess, where they're like it's gonna close once they've retrieved everything out of there, which they do. They get all the stones and they get what I guess was the fifth element prior. Yeah. Inside of it's like a tomb sarcophagus.
She's in she's in a sarcophagus and on the ship that she's kept on, it explodes and then they
Well, you know what? I was wondering about this. When I was looking at it, there's no discernible features on the sarcophagus that tells you if it's a man or a woman.
Yeah, no, they don't. Yeah, it's very generalist.
But I mean, eventually they do like quote unquote remake her, and then but up until that point, everyone who is in the movie and is talking about this perfect being, they're assuming it's a man. They keep saying he whenever they were referring, and then they remake the perfect being and it's a her, and it's Milla Jovovich's character, which has a really long name. Yeah, which is kind of funny because she says it at one point, and then he's like, "Is there anything shorter?" Like, and then you call her Lilu, and that's how she gets her name. Yep. But so they get all of the stones out, they leave, and then he's like, "All right, I'm going to pass down the knowledge," and then it jumps forward 300 years, and then you have the president, which is hilarious because one, he's black, so like that was like in the 90s, way before like any of this actually happened. So they had a black president before that was actually a thing with Obama. But it was the guy from Friday. It's Debo.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I know. I've seen him from somewhere. I feel like he's just gonna steal my bike now whenever I see him.
It's so weird. I had seen Friday, of course, so I was like, "That's fucking Debo."
Oh, that's so funny. Oh my god,
it's such a character change, but he's really good.
Yeah,
like it's an interesting take on what the president would be at that time because he's really understanding. He's like open to opinions. He even is open to like the priest opinion after something happens. And then he even like will call people and tell them like congratulations and take the time to go visit. So like he's a good president by most like means and terms, like when you get to see him. And then the whole cast up until that point is really diverse. Like there's a lot of people of color in the film, like right from the beginning. And then I mean, it does focus in on Bruce Willis and Mila Jovovich, but it's still like, on Lilu. It was interesting, though, to see how they sort of dealt with their, like, space politics, which is, like, what are they going to do if something enters their, like, space? And at first, they're like, okay, we're not going to do anything. But then the general's like, we got to shoot it first and kill it, which is interesting. Yeah, because it's like he's a very gun-ho general, which makes sense because I feel like that always sort of happens. You end up having like a really stern and tough general who wants to take care of it by just killing it. And it was interesting because this evil, it's technically like evil incarnate. Like it's supposed to be like the most evil thing in the universe. And it chose to just like make a planet out of itself so it could absorb things.
Yep. So it could eat everything.
Yeah. So like it does that, and it ties in with the main villain of the film, Zorg, who's played by Gary Oldman, which is fucking great. He's such a chameleon for all of the roles that he takes on. And he does a really good job with this one, showing to be like a really unhinged kind of person. So they essentially encounter it, and then they're not sure what to do. And this is when those aliens, I think they're called the Monoshiwans. They're the ones who take the stones. They're returning and being like, they're on their way back because they know the evil showed up. And so this is when the priest tells the president, like, oh, they've returned and you got to let them like safe passage. But then some mercenaries hired by the villain kill all of the Monoshiwans. Yeah, to try to get the stones back. But you don't find out until a little bit later that the stones were given to the diva, to the blue lady who is like basically like a singing diva of her like time in the universe. And everyone knows who she is, which is great. And so that's sort of like how all the story ties in. But first they have to like get Lilu's character introduced, which brings in Bruce Willis's character, Corbin Dallas. And so they bring him in because he's just a regular cab driver, and she literally falls into his cab. Because she gets
bada boom.
Yeah, she gets she gets made in the lab. I love when they're taking the hand in. And they're like, oh, yeah, this is the survivor. And he's like, it's not much of a survivor, but okay. And then they explain all these crazy science that doesn't make any sense. Like, this is the only bit of, like, sci-fi science that you're like, none of this makes sense. Because he was essentially saying that, like, instead of, like, 24 chromosomes, they had, like, 200,000.
Oh, no, he was commenting on her DNA structure.
Yeah.
And because she's the fifth element, she has, like, an abnormal amount of chromosomes.
Is essentially what they're getting at. I love when they're in the black light.
And his face is all covered in...
Sounds like a freak of nature to me. And he was like, yeah, can't wait to meet him. And like they both look fucking weird. Yeah, that was great. And they're like basically all glowing underneath the black light.
And all the blood, you can see the blood splatters on his face.
Yeah, exactly. And so they go in and they put the hand into this sort of machine that can reconstruct like human tissue and things like that. And so they reconstruct her and find out that it is a woman and that it's Lilu. And so she is sort of like immediately conscious of what's going on. Like she's really smart, but can only speak that one language, which is supposed to be like the divine language for them. And so she eventually learns everything by just like getting onto the computer and just absorbing all of the knowledge, which is kind of a cool way to like skip her like learning curve. She was just like, she was on the computer. She went A through Z and figured out everything that was associated with it. And then she didn't get to like the rest of it, which is why she doesn't know certain words. It's really cheesy. But that's how she meets Corbin. What did you think about like their sort of interactions at first when she's like in the car and they can't speak to each other and he's like immediately in love with her?
Yeah, right. He just like, he has like that love at first sight moment. She's definitely like desperate at this point because she's being chased by the cops and by the organization and everything. So she basically, the government and the cops are after her. So she kind of expects Corbin to help her. And she sort of has no one else to turn to at the moment. So she turns to like the only... She's not very good with English at first either. She learns fast, though. She learns really fast. So it's like she was able to, put together like, oh, please help. And she like can only say that to him. I thought it was a good way to introduce your character. Her just like she literally falls through his ceiling into his life.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like an angel from heaven.
They were laying on the romance really heavy for their characters.
Oh yeah.
And it was interesting because I didn't feel like it was cheesy when you first saw it.
No.
Right up until probably the very last scene where they're like pretty much just making out inside of the rehabilitation tube that they're laying in. I was like, up until that point, I felt like it was pretty good, and then I was like, wow, this is really cheesy, and that's how they ended. They ended on like them making out and then being like, oh, like they need some more time, like 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes.
Yeah.
But that's like the comedy of the movie, though, because that's why
it
really does mix the serious and the humorous together, and like the adorable cheesiness of things as well. So it's a charming movie.
I did think it was interesting that at first everyone was assuming the perfect being was going to be a man, and then it turns out to be a woman. And so they're already making a statement with that alone, being like, in their universe, out of anything that could possibly be made, the most perfect being is a woman. But some people have criticized it because it's a white woman. But I mean, it's like there's only I think you kind of have to pick your battles with that one because they already made it a woman. And so that is already a good, strong statement. I don't think he was considering too much on that when he was making it. And I think he was looking for a certain role, which he filled with Mila Jovovich, because she'd already been an action star at that point, and she would fit well for that. But I do understand the critique that you could have had a different person be the main person there. But either way, it's interesting that not only is she a woman, but she doesn't really seem to care for any of their expectations and their sort of assumptions of who she is, especially when they're like thinking that she's very fragile and that she's going to be like a character that needs to be taken care of. But at one point she even tells Corbin, she's like, no, I'm going to take care of you because I know how to do like all of these things. And so it sort of switches where she ends up being a really integral part of the story because she pushes the narrative along with her fighting. And then it sort of comes full circle where the way to complete that perfect being is that they have to experience love. And so that's like it's like the quote unquote cheesy romantic part of it but I mean, there's a lot of sci-fi movies that do that.
Yeah.
Like, have you seen, God, what is it? Interstellar?
Yeah. A long time ago. I saw it like one.
Basically what Interstellar boils down to is that the thing that saves, Matthew McConaughey's character is the love for his daughter. Like, that love can span across universes and different dimensions, and that's what saves him in the end. And people were upset. They were like, "What? How are you just going to throw out all the science fiction and be like, the thing that saves you is love?" And you're like, what the fuck? So it's not an uncommon thing to do, but it was interesting that was a piece of being a perfect being, that you couldn't exist without experiencing a love for someone else. And so that's sort of what they're getting at the end of it.
Sort of like experiencing love from another, or just experiencing love in general, is a way to you can complete yourself in a way.
Yeah, because they're not like immediately having sex.
No,
you know, he's not like being really derogatory with her. He does try to kiss her, which is hilarious because she puts a gun to his head and he's like, oh, okay, shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
So sorry. And then he asks the priest, like, oh, she said something to me, but I don't know what she said. And then apparently she said never without my permission.
Yeah, that was the quote.
He was like, oh, okay. And like, so it was a quick lesson on consent that they just kind of threw in there.
Yeah.
And then like just moved on so that they didn't like stay too heavy on it. But I mean, by the end of it, they're bonding.
Some of these things I don't even know if they're always like political or social statements. Sometimes I think it's just these are just how the characters are interacting. Like Corbin definitely seems like a guy who in his like past with the military and whatnot, that he would be one of those people to kind of go for it.
Yeah.
Sort of deal. And so I feel like that's what his character does, and then he figures out real fucking fast with a gun in his face that he over fucking stepped his boundaries right there. And you know what I mean? Because like he could have also fallen into the like action hero kind of trope where I saved the girl, I think maybe she likes me now, blah blah blah, let's just kiss her. And not even...
it's true. He does in fact leave her alone.
Yeah, at first,
he leaves, and then they go back and encounter him because he gets the tickets to go to God, what is it? The planet.
There's someone that pulls that for him though.
Yeah,
someone makes that happen. I think the military makes him win basically because they want to send him on like a
mission.
Yeah.
So the guy's like, I know the perfect guy, and he's like, of course it's Corbin. So he goes and rigs the contest so that he wins, and try to make it inconspicuous. And so the priest and Lilu go and steal the tickets from him, but it isn't really that successful. And so they end up doing that. So that was interesting that they had sort of the underlying commentary there, and also to consider. I think the only thing that was kind of troubling was that some of it seemed like it was made from the male gaze, and another part seems like it changed it, like mid-film. And I don't know if it was just like a change in direction or something, but at a certain point, Lilu was not being seen that way, and it was instead like one of the main action stars for the movie, and like was capable of taking care of herself. So that was interesting. And then Corbin actually goes through some sort of change. He like changes from the beginning of the film, where he is kind of like a hot-headed kind of person and is more wanting to like jump into whatever he's doing, and then he sort of understands that he needs to communicate with her and understand.
He develops from being sort of like this, like, because at the very beginning of the movie he's very like down, super down. He's like upset that he's already gone through 3 cigarettes in the last 4 minutes that he's been awake.
Right.
His like cab gets fucked up.
Yeah.
By poor girl. Lilu falls through his fucking cab, and then he gets in like an accident. I think before that also.
Well,
I think.
Well, he starts the day with like 5 points.
Yeah.
And then by the time Lilu falls into his car, he has like 2 or like 1 point left.
Yeah.
So he's been through some shit through the day where he's just losing his license points.
Yep.
And would possibly like lose his license entirely. But he does end up helping her, and is like, oh fuck, like he basically says it too, where he's like, Finger's gonna kill me, which is the guy who owns the cab.
Yep.
Because that cab just gets wrecked.
Yep.
And he does this escape, and they hide like on the very lower levels of the city, which is like foggy.
It's like sooty, and like it looks like what LA will be in like a few years.
Right. You keep building on top of it.
If you keep building on top of it, you'll get out of the smog.
Well, you know what? It makes sense for New York, because New York has been doing that.
Yeah.
They've been building on top of old ruins, and they keep doing it. And so at some point, I would guess, that might happen.
Eventually, they're just gonna Futurama just put a new street over.
Yeah,
the old
exactly,
cities.
and just keep going up. What I thought was interesting too was from the filmmaking sort of the perspective. They had really interesting music right from the beginning, and then even during that chase scene, they have an interesting piece of music which I couldn't even place into a genre, but it almost sounded like Indian, like something you would hear in India, and sort of like a tribal piece of music, and then it switches to like rap at some point. And so like they keep going through all these different things. So they were trying to really push home the idea that at this point the universe is really diverse.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of people and a lot of different things going on.
It only makes sense that it would be that way.
Exactly. It's like it everything. I never questioned the people that were in the movie.
No.
Everyone in the background just like, that sounds right. Like,
there's the Chinese guy like rolling his like ramen cart around.
I love that.
And then he like I love the scene where he's like at the window, and you think that he's at like a shop, and then he pulls out, you're like, oh fuck, Corbin's just in his house. Like
he rolled up to his window.
Yeah.
Well, he's in one of like the traditional boats that they would
like,
go around in a river, but it's like
this is gonna sound bad, but I feel like it's George Takei that's on there, but I don't think that it is.
No, not at all.
It's definitely not, is it?
It's a similar character.
Yeah, he just looks similar. I mean, that's just I'm bad.
Well, no, it's like an archetype. Like he ends up being this sort of person who's really optimistic. He even tells him like, I'll bet you lunch that you've got good news. And it turns out he got fired from the cab company. So he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. And like gives him free lunch and goes away. But he was like, it's fine, man. Like, I was not expecting to do this. And he's like, oh, that's good. Like, you're seeing some good out of the bad.
Right.
And then he kind of moves away. So that was funny. Yeah. I liked those moments because it was able to slow down the story. And then you get to know a little bit more about him. And at that point, he's getting fired. But the reason he got fired was because there's a conversation with Zorg and with one of his like associates or his henchmen who is like, oh, we're getting people bothering us about all of the money, so we need to fire some people. And he's like, let's fire like 500,000 people. And he's like, fire 1 million. And part of the people he fired is Corbin.
Yep.
So that's why he got fired. And it wasn't necessarily because of what he was doing. So it's just bad luck for him up until that point. And so this is sort of like he's the lowest he could probably be. He like got divorced and was like not with his ex-wife, who apparently ran off with the lawyer who was doing their divorce. He was like, I've only gotten 2 messages in this thing, and the first one was from my wife telling me she's leaving me. The second one was from the lawyer who said he's leaving with my wife. So like he's got nothing but bad news in that thing, which is why he never checks it. And so it's why he doesn't know that he got the tickets and won, because the guy shows up there before he even gets any of that. But before that, everyone knows that he's won. Even his mom calls him. And it's great hearing his mom, because she's like, I felt like she had like a Jersey accent.
Yeah, she totally does.
And was like just harassing him, like, why don't you ever hang out with me? You can't call me. I should have been the one who goes on this trip. Like, I pushed you out for like 9 months, and it's just like just so funny. She's like irritating him, and is like really being this mom who like of course loves him, but is like really getting into like just like what most parents do. Well, they'll start teasing you, or they will be like, why don't you call me? You never call me.
Never.
And so it gets into that, and everyone knows. And so this is when the priest and Lilu, they like basically break into his place and like steal the tickets from him. One of the funnier things I think was I think we mentioned it before, but it was like sort of product placements where they had like McDonald's, and they had the cops who were in there who were like, I'm not doing anything until I'm done with lunch. And like they're getting the McDonald's food. But what I thought was interesting is that this is one of the few movies that I saw where the police are not incompetent.
Yeah.
They knew what they were doing. Like every time that they were like on the scene to do something, they did like exactly what they were supposed to. And so it kind of broke away from like, I feel like, which is common in a lot of sci-fi stories, that the police or like whatever enforcing presence is there is always sort of not able to do their job. It reminds me of like the stormtroopers who just like can't.
Yeah, they can't.
Shit.
Yeah, they're not actually that dangerous.
Right.
It's sort of like yeah, I think a lot of sci-fi does that because a lot of it's trying to do like a critique on authority.
Yes.
And like authority thinks that it knows what it's doing, but it really doesn't. But
yeah.
It makes your world more dangerous and makes the authority more dangerous if they're actually competent.
Yeah. And in this case, they're really good.
Like, they're on top of their shit. They've got all the communication.
Yep.
Even though they're still, but the thing is, they don't take away like the classic like cop trope of like being like an overweight an overweight dude. Yeah. They just have a lot of gear.
yeah, exactly. And they're able to like still manage their jobs and everything.
It's not that they're incompetent. It's just that they're fat and have bad cardio. That's really all we know.
I can only assume it's like the future where they have so much things to assist them that their sort of like weight gain and loss is not really a huge issue. Because as far as I can tell, no one really makes any commentary about how someone looks. There's really no, besides like when they're like, oh, Lilu is like perfect. But even then, they don't say anything specific. Like, but it should be noted that they say she's perfect anytime they see her naked. So it's like, so there was those moments where like she just changes because she doesn't care about what's going on. She's not like, she's not fearing that someone's going to see her a certain way. So they like, but the thing is that they always turned around. They were always like, shit.
They turn around. The first time she like, when she first gets made, they're just standing there and kind of doing like she's perfect.
Yeah.
And then, like, you know, the guy fills it in for him. And then there's a time when the priest and Corbin turn around while she's changing because she just, like, rips off her clothes, don't give a fuck about who's around. She's just trying to get dressed.
Yeah, exactly. And so that ends up happening. It happens, like, 3 times. But nothing is ever shown. And same with, like, a lot of the violence. There's not really anything that, like, you see directly. You sort of get, like, an idea of what's going on. With the exception, maybe, of him, like, reaching into her into the diva's stomach to get the stones out. But even that, like, it's blue. So it wasn't even really, like...
It's, like, green blue.
Yeah, it's, like... I don't know what they used for that. But it was, like, a
green
goo.
Corn syrup.
Yeah, it really did look like
they were just
syrup.
Like, we'll use green instead of red.
So... They get the tickets, and the priest and his younger, I guess, trainee, I don't know what to call him. He was kind of insignificant for most of the story, but he tries to get him to go with Lilu to this winning contest so that they can get the stones from the diva. And that doesn't work out at all for them because Corbin actually shows up and replaces him and gets on the plane or ship, shuttle, whatever it is, with Lilu, and that's how they get over to where the diva's at, and the story continues at that point. I think what was funny is at this point you get to meet what's his name, Ruby Rod.
Ruby
Rod. His name is already hilarious because it's Rod, but it's like
it's an alliteration.
Yeah, alliteration is Ruby Rod, and he's like this icon and this radio star who is like broadcasting to all of the universe. And everyone knows who he is, but he's interesting because he's a very feminine character played by, who was it again?
Chris Tucker,
who he's wearing like a skin tight suit that has roses on the top, and it's very feminine.
He's got
looking.
like the leopard print, like skin tight thing.
That's right.
With like the big poofy like thing around his neck, and then his hair is ridiculous looking, and it's got like it looks like It looks like a tube just coming out of the top of his head. It's like the most ridiculous Afro
like
pompadour I've ever seen.
Yes, exactly. Oh, that's exactly what it is.
It's an Afro pompadour. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like, there you go. That's what
great.
I would describe it.
He's like, he ends up being, so as far as we can assume, he's a straight character. So he like tries to get it on with all the women that he encounters.
Yeah, every one of the flight attendants, he's
most
like,
of the flight attendants,
all of them.
Yeah.
Like,
and they're all obsessed with him too, because like they like his voice, they hear him on the radio, even like the short little bits when he runs up to them and is like whispering in their ear. And it's such a great breaking of the male stereotype that they had for these characters, where like he's very feminine, but he's also very straight, and nobody questions him on it.
It's like, yo, I could be anything. I could be your man, my man, your man.
And he's trying so hard to get a word out of Corbin, and Corbin's not having it.
No.
And so he's like, no, I don't want to be a part of this show. And he's supposed to be on with him for like,
Kobe,
a couple hours. Yeah.
Kobe, you gotta be like, I just love it. He calls him Kobe all the time.
Yeah, that's great.
I just think of Kobe Bryant every time, and I just feel
Pretty
like
much.
I feel like he should just follow Kobe Bryant and be like, Kobe, you gotta go get your new tennis shoes.
They insert him as like a very serious, not serious. They insert him as like the main person who gives all of the comedy.
Mm-hmm.
So like he is that person who's going to
the comic relief.
Yeah, he's the comic relief for most of the film, and but I mean he does end up helping.
He helps a lot, and he ends up showing when like the action's the thickest.
Yeah,
he shows up. The comic relief shows up and melds, and this is another like example of the movie melding comedy with the serious and doing it really well. Is they give you the most ridiculous and eccentric person for like one of the most ridiculous action-packed like set of scenes.
Oh, totally.
And so it's like it was great because they matched that energy really well.
Yeah,
they matched that energy really well. So it was very fantastic. Though it was great. I love Rudy Rob's like just a reason to watch the movie. Just Chris Tucker's performance is just worth it.
Yeah,
that like makes part of the movie entirely. Just that.
It's still really funny to watch, and he also goes around and just knows most of the famous people. Mm-hmm. I think even at one point he says he has like a recording of someone's daughter. And it's like her moaning, basically. And he like, I'll show you that later after the show, because he's just been like going around having sex with a bunch of people. And so it's like they established that this character, he's well connected, he knows people, and like nothing about him is questioned. He even has like an entourage that follows him and like loves everything he does. Mm-hmm. And he like constantly is trying to get like their approval and is like, what do you think? What did you think of it? And then he doesn't like their answers, so he like shoos them away. Yeah. Oh, it's great. Yeah.
This is totally off topic, but I saw I don't know if I showed you that, but I saw a magic card altar that was Rudy Rod.
Yes, you sent it to me.
For cancel is what the spell was. But anyway, off topic, so continue.
You totally sent that one to me, and it was great. I love that.
Funny.
No, it worked out well, and I think it's cool that they inserted a character like this, because you have Corbin, who is that typical male character, he's very like
he's masculine.
He's masculine.
Yep.
And he wasn't excessively masculine.
Nope.
So like he was masculine enough. He was trying to understand how people are feeling.
He seems like a person.
Yeah, he was a real like he's a real person.
A person who lifted weights and was in the military.
And so you know what? Now that I think about it, I wonder if they inserted Ruby Rod's character as sort of like, so there's something in film critical analysis in like the 50s and the 60s where they had the very straight male character, and then they had sort of a person who was opposite of him, who they usually would call like a dandy character. And so, but this is different because the dandy character was usually gay, and they didn't want anything to do with women. Whereas in this case, he is a dandy character, but he's also straight. So it was a breaking of that stereotype and representing different types of masculinity in the same movie.
Putting the flip on a film technique or a narrative choice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I like it. That's very cool.
They even so it could be argued that they had several forms of masculinity in the film. They had Corbin, they had Ruby Rod, they had the priest, Cornelius, who is an older man. He's religious. He's really respectful, and that's sort of like he's a devout person. And then you also have the president, who is like a very political and stern person, but he's understanding of like the situation. So you get all of those in one. And you have
Zorg, who's not masculine, really.
No, yeah, he's interesting.
He's very much the that villain that relies on his henchmen to get stuff done.
Yeah,
kind of deal.
He actually does not do anything until the very end of the film, where even then, he still fails.
The best part about Zorg in this movie is that he doesn't really encounter any of the protagonists except for Lilu for a moment. And then he just doesn't encounter. He doesn't really ever encounter Corbin.
Yeah.
Or Rudy Rod or any of the. He encounters Lilu briefly. And shoots at her. And that's it. And then he wants to blow it up and leaves.
He talks to Cornelius, who ends up saving his life because he's like choking on a grape. And so that was interesting.
How will your machines help you now? Do you have a button for that?
He had a really interesting argument, though. So do you remember the scene where he's sitting at his desk and he has a glass and he throws it off of the desk and is like, look at all the little machines that are coming out to clean this.
Yes. How destruction creates more than creation does.
Yeah, he's essentially arguing that a bit of chaos can help life. And it sort of...
it keeps life going.
Yeah, it keeps it going. And so, like, it's a really interesting point that he brings up that the robots were designed by engineers who are going to get paid because they made those things, and now they have a purpose. They're cleaning up him throwing his glass off the table. But then it sort of gets all unraveled when he's trying to save himself from choking and nothing can help him except for the other person in the room, Cornelius, who he does help him because he's not a terrible person.
Nope, he even helps the villain.
Yeah, and so
Cornelius
gives him a big pat on the back and he spits out the cherry. He's choking on a cherry is what it is. And so that was interesting. But they really got into those moments for a little bit where they're like really getting into how people interact with each other. And then they would bring you back to the action and sort of the comedy of the movie. And so towards the end there, they're going to exchange the stones. So they know that Lilu's there. They know the diva's there. The diva's expecting her. And so she's like, I'll give you these stones after the concert.
Yeah, and they do a pretty good job of keeping the fact that their plan is a little bit subtle.
Yes.
And they do that interestingly by showing the perspective of the diva, and she makes eye contact with Lilu immediately.
Yeah.
And it's just like she doesn't say anything, she just looks at her and stares at her for like a decent amount of time and then leaves the scene.
Yeah. And they know of each other's presence, which I can only guess the diva has sort of met that perfect being before. And this is just a different version of that person. And so they don't give any sort of numbers on age for anybody. So the diva could be very old at this point and has just been around for a while. But it goes straight into her singing, which is still phenomenal to watch.
So good.
It's so good.
I love that whole I would watch that scene in the movie is just great. Her whole little performance and everything.
Well, even her
fantastic soprano.
Well, even her singing performance is sci-fi. Supposedly there's no one alive that has that octave range to be able to go all the way up there and then all the way back down. And so I think they in post-production they just had multiple singers and they meshed it together to make her singing.
I mean, there's people that Sopranos have a knack for hitting really those are if I'm not mistaken, Sopranos are the high note singers.
Yeah.
And she goes down a lot of octaves because she just whoa, she just all the way down. Yeah. You're just oh girl, I feel it. You're just oh my god, you're just
and
oh, it's
everybody
so good.
Watching is mesmerized. They're this is the coolest concert.
And then it busts into it starts off with very classical opera sort of deal, and then it busts into this pop dance track number.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Fucking cool as
they
hell.
They end up matching her singing with Lilu's fighting as well.
Yep, that's
when
also...
she is beating up, I don't know what the mercenaries were called.
I forget their names,
too.
They're I remember, I forget them.
They're essentially the only
they're
sort
space
of...
orcs.
Yeah, exactly. Honestly, they're the space orcs.
Basically.
The only context you get is that the Confederation that the Earth is a part of sort of disbanded them and kind of didn't treat them as equals to everybody, and so they wanted their revenge, which is why they aligned with Zorg to try to get back at people and to help this ultimate evil. And so that's really the only context you get, other than that they just sort of want to do things for money and they need weapons for their rebellion. And so they end up just proceeding with that story, but they are there on the ship as well, and they take over the ship at one point because they're fuck it, we're trying to do this subtly, but we need to just take over the ship and figure things out. And this is when the diva gets shot, and she falls off stage very dramatically, as any real performer should in those scenes. And does the most dramatic fall, and then Corbin pulls her aside, and then this is an interesting conversation she has with him. She tells him that Lilu needs him. And that what she's going to
need.
Your
love.
Yeah,
she needs you and your love.
She needs you and your love. And it's but it isn't necessarily that she's so helpless. It was more
No.
of like she needs that connection to continue being that perfect being.
To complete the ritual to save the world.
Right, essentially to save the world. And then she does it very vaguely and is like, well, the stones aren't in me. And then he's like, what the fuck? Like, what do you mean in you? And then he's like, oh, it's literally like in your stomach. And like pulls them out, gives them the ruby. And then that's when all of the action, I think, for most of the movie happens.
He gives Rudy the gun and is just like,
I
here,
love
hold
that.
the gun on here. And he's like, Kobe, my God, I don't know what I'm doing, Kobe. Just like,
I love that where he's like, I don't feel right. This isn't
feel right, Pope.
And then just ends up shooting the guy, and he's like,
On accident.
Sorry.
He like tries to put his face back together.
I love that. That made me laugh so much when I saw that. And that's pretty much when they have to like escape and they have to get through everything. And so it goes through all of the action scenes. And of course, Corbin is highly capable the entire time. He's very much like, you don't feel like he's going to be threatened at any point, like he's going to get killed. I love the scene with the other famous person who is deaf, the big bulky blonde dude who is like supposed to be a movie star, and he's across from him behind a bar, and he's like, I need the gun, like throw the gun over to me.
He
throws two cue balls over to him, and it's such a hilarious joke because it's like he doesn't know what was going on. He just throws over these two balls at him. It's super gay. Like, he was obviously like meant to be a gay innuendo is what they're doing with that. And then he's like, thanks. That's exactly what I needed right now. And it's a really funny moment.
Here are some balls.
And he's just like, he's like, oh yeah, I'm glad I helped you.
I think I missed the gay innuendo there.
Right. Well, it's just because like the character himself, he's another character like Ruby. He was really feminine. He was dressed like in like a floral, like see-through shirt, basically. But of course, in that scene, there's like multiple women like hanging off him. So like they were really playing with the idea that in this universe, like the total masculinity and only being that was appealing to people. It was the opposite. There was a lot of feminine characters, feminine men who were attractive to women in the series. So that was pretty funny. And then this is when Zorik shows up, right? He's like, you gotta do something yourself. And he goes back and he tries to find the stones and fails again, basically. He gets the box and realizes that there's nothing in them. And he's just like freaking out. He like sits in the spaceship while he's going away. There's only like 15 minutes until the bomb explodes. And then he gets back in and is just like, okay. And this is when he drops in the little key card to stop the bomb and realizes that those mercenaries brought their own bomb.
Yeah, and then that sets up when they lose for the rebellion.
Right, yeah,
You're
exactly.
like, oh no.
Yep.
And he's only got 5 seconds.
I love that Ruby was like, that was the best show ever. Like that was the best show I've ever done. Yeah, because it was, which apparently it's from 5 to 7 or 4 to 7, 5 to 7. So it was like all of that happened in like 2 hours.
Yeah.
Whole, like their time, as opposed to like what we had seen. But then it doesn't end there. So they escape the exploding ship, and they're like, yeah, everything is fine. Like we're gonna get these, and then that's when they get notice, or they get informed that the evil planet that was hanging out before is now moving towards Earth. And so they're like, now it turns into like a time crunch for them to get over and figure out how the stones work. Yep. Which is probably one of the funnier scenes because they don't know how they work just yet. And they end up having to figure out that the elements are what really set them off. And I feel like that's like an old story archetype that you need sort of all of the elements to come together. Yeah. And that the final element is like human existence basically, and love and that experience. And so that's where they sort of end on like a cheesy note. But I think I liked the blending of the comedy. I liked that there was just enough sci-fi to cover the ridiculousness of everything that was going on.
The movie is like not too serious. It doesn't take itself too seriously. And that's one thing that I really like about it as well is, you know, they do a really good blending of like the serious and the comedy and then the sci-fi as well, but they don't take any of it too seriously, and they just tried to make like a fun movie and then put a little bit of lore in there.
Oh, yeah. He must have created his own bits of lore for the movie so that he could just continue like that. So he did a lot of world building, but just enough to like get you through the story and you don't have to worry too much about like these other things.
I wouldn't want a Fifth Element 2.
No, it was a great standalone film.
Yeah, it doesn't need a sequel.
They'd probably have to like create like the rest of their love story basically.
Yeah, and that would be really boring.
Yeah. Honestly,
I don't care. They're together, great.
Right.
Done.
I feel like if they did something like that, it would have to be like the possibility of them not being together.
Mm-hmm.
That they sort of just like came together for a moment and then they figured out that they weren't right for each other. Would probably be the like better version of that story. But either way, the film sort of, to me, it aged kind of well. There isn't too much about it where I'm like, oh, this is like an awful movie. It did really well for critics. It got like a 90 something.
It has like a cult following. It came in one of
Definitely
those
a cult
had
following.
a very from what I've read, its reception when it came out was very mixed.
Yeah, they didn't know what to make of it because
it's weird.
It's a weird story.
There's no other movie like The Fifth Element.
Not that I can think of. No,
there's lots of sci-fi, but there's nothing that's The Fifth Element.
No, and it also seems to be like they didn't go too extravagant with all of the weapons or the CGI.
Grounded.
It was it was very believable for the world that they lived in.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't doing anything super crazy, and that you would be like, I don't know if like something like that would work out. They didn't take very much time to like get you into the science of what's going on. They were just like, this is it. This is how it works, and you don't have to worry about it. Like even like their sleep chambers, you just assume that they got in and like whatever was in there would put them to sleep, and then they would wake up when they got to their location. So like little bits like that, you just didn't question it. And I think that's well done for like the writer and for the director and like sort of the art direction they chose for the movie, where nothing really seems out of place. All of it fits in. They have like a good color gradient through the whole film, and all of it sort of blends together. There's nothing that sort of sticks out. The only thing I have to say that kind of bothered me was the diva's makeup and look. Because when you got a close-up look on her, it looked like a latex suit, basically.
Yep. They definitely... I feel like there was a part of the budget that did not go into that suit.
I think they put her in her suit and then they painted her face blue.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of where they went.
She's on display for a very short amount of time too. So it's like, I'm sure they were just like, this is like not a major character, important, but not major. So we're not going to do too much into it. They did more for everything else.
Yes.
And whatnot. I'm sure all the CGI for the time period was super expensive to do.
Yeah, for real.
And so, like, getting someone to do the, a suit for someone, probably not too bad.
Oh, yeah, totally. Do you have any final thoughts on...
I love The Fifth Element. That's my final thought. It's a great fucking movie, and I ever since seeing it, when I first saw it in, like, 98, when I was a child.
Yeah.
And until now, I've always like rewatched the movie like every couple years or so. I'll end up like being like, oh fuck, The Fifth Element, yeah. And then I'm all excited about it. I love Fifth Element.
Yeah, hell yeah.